Lawlessness sweeps the land from D.C., Seattle, Portland, New York. Mass protests are all over the place. And even on the 4th of July, when we were told over and over again that we could not celebrate the independence of our minds and our nation, many people took to the streets and protested for their ideology, Black Lives Matter. At some of these, I'm doing air quotes here, protests, they destroyed statues. They vandalized property. And yet they keep saying in the press, peaceful protests, peaceful. These protesters are noble and just as they destroy statues that they have no claim to. I mean, the community, the public owns these things. Who are these authoritarians, right? Well, I know why you clicked on this video, because the headline is much more damning than just talking about a statue being torn down. But I wanted to start by talking about general lawlessness, because it goes to a really dark place, You see, what you're looking at right now on the screen is just a story about a statue. It's nothing but a statue. Why we should be able to tear it down, the protesters say. The police should be defunded, the protesters say. I'd like to show you now a glimpse of that reality, where we can see truly what these far leftist intersectionalists hath wrought. I bring you now to a rather horrifying story. Child killed in Atlanta shooting on July 4th. Police believe the shooting happened near the Wendy's where Rayshard Brooks was killed on May 30th. In fact, according to a city councilman claiming to have an eyewitness testimony. So again, hearsay. The rumor is it was actually it was an armed group that was related to the ongoing Rayshard Brooks Black Lives Matter protests. They fired on this vehicle, killing an 8-year-old girl. The police have not yet released any information, but it's certainly being heavily implied by many news outlets that this absolutely was related to the unrest in Atlanta. Now, at the very least, perhaps these armed men that killed this little girl were not protesters, were not Black Lives Matter, had nothing to do with it. Well, then it's still a result of the protests because police have been demoralized. And following the arrest and charging of the officer involved, many police officers called in sick. We saw a widespread blue flu in Atlanta. Now you have criminal groups and ideological groups and armed groups that are emboldened to go out and do their thing. Now, first and foremost, I want to make sure I make this clear. I believe in Atlanta, open carry is allowed, and there have been armed groups going about their business, and that's totally legal, standing guard at the Wendy's. The only problem is when you have people who jump the gun and basically just snap. And what happens? A little girl dies. Let me read you the story and I'll break down the current evidence we have on what's going on. And then we're going to talk about where we are as a country in lawlessness, because also in Georgia the other day, we saw a Black identity extremist movement marching through the streets armed. And I got to give the founder some respect. Dude seems tough as nails. He knows what he knows what he wants, and he's demanding it. He says he refuses to negotiate. I don't agree with him. I think it's kind of freaky, but we'll talk about that and lawlessness and where we're headed and after this story. But I really want to highlight this because this makes me angry. This little girl didn't have to die, man. All because the family just exited the highway at the wrong intersection, man. That's really it. 11 Alive reports. Police said an 8-year-old girl died Saturday night after being shot in Atlanta near one of the city's busiest highways. Atlanta police said they responded to the area of University Avenue and downtown Connector just before 10 p.m. Atlanta Police Sergeant John Chaffee said the caller told the police the child had been shot and was being taken by a private vehicle to Atlanta Medical Center. Chaffee said the investigators met with the vehicle's occupants at the hospital. He said that the child received medical treatment at the hospital but did not survive her injuries. According to Chaffee, the preliminary police investigation indicates the girl was riding in a vehicle with her mother and an adult friend when they exited the interstate onto University Avenue. Chaffee said the driver tried to enter a parking lot in the 1200 block of Pryor Road when he was confronted by a group of armed people who had blocked the entrance. During the confrontation, Chaffee said, the group opened fire on the vehicle, striking it multiple times and hitting the girl inside. Chaffee said the driver then drove to Atlantica Medical Center for help. He said the homicide investigators are working to determine the circumstances surrounding the shooting and to identify the suspects as their ongoing investigation continues. The parking lot that Chaffee mentioned is not far from the Wendy's where Rayshard Brooks was shot and killed by police on May 30th. According to tweets from Atlanta City Councilman Antonio Brown and Council President Felicia Moore, the juvenile who died was an 8-year-old girl. The same location has been the scene of multiple protests since the day of the shooting. More shootings have also occurred in that immediate area since the shooting, with at least one injuring a protester. However, in the most recent shooting, police have provided no details to suggest the incident was in any way related to one of the protests. However, the city councilman cited here actually does provide some circumstantial evidence that may be rumor and hearsay, but if you trust a city councilman, that's up to you, okay? What we know is there has been widespread lawlessness. Armed groups, as far as I know, are allowed to be out doing their thing, but the tension, it's in the air. It feels charged. Someone, another commentator I was speaking with told me it feels like there's danger in the air, like it's really charged and you can feel it. And I said, I tell you what, man, it feels like a switch got flicked. I really do mean it. Things seem way more tense. Last night, I was actually given a healthy dose of optimism in seeing so many people defy these unconstitutional, or I shouldn't even necessarily say that, just insults to America by saying we can't celebrate our Independence Day. And people in many cities just went out and lit off fireworks. And it was like watching the entire cities explode. You got to see these videos, man. It's really amazing. But let me show you what's going on with this story. First, Antonio Brown tweeted, in regards to the incident that occurred at the Wendy's, there's misinformation circulating, misrepresenting what occurred. It was an 8-year-old girl that was shot. I am not aware of her condition at this time, but I have confirmed with APD the Klan was not involved in the shooting. Here's a statement from an eyewitness. This is according to Antonio Brown, Atlanta City Council District 3. Here's what the witness says. All I know is what I saw. I saw a car driving past the barricades at Wendy's. Then someone at the Wendy's shot into the car. The car pulled up next to mine. There was a little girl in the car with her eyes wide open and not moving or breathing. The parents drove to the emergency room. That's all I saw. I left after that. It is possible shootings took place after, but that is what I saw. Now, I want you to keep in mind, this is just someone typed something up. I have no idea who this witness is. Can't verify or confirm at this point. Rumors. I normally don't like to entertain this level of rumor and speculation without hard evidence, but it is coming from an Atlanta City Councilman who is cited by this other news outlet, which is verified. And the only thing you really need to take away from this, as I said before, is that lawlessness is sweeping the nation completely. That's why I highlighted the Christopher Columbus statue, being torn down. But let me show you this. This is an older story. It's, older as in a couple weeks ago. Isn't that crazy? Armed protesters take over the streets near the Wendy's parking lot where Rayshard Brooks was killed and use crude roadblocks to prevent people from getting to their homes. That falls in line with what we just heard from Antonio, the city councilman, that he's saying a witness said that they tried to drive past the barricades and got shot. Take a look at these images. You have many people armed with various rifles who have been in this parking lot and armed. But the police said it was a different parking lot. Could that be because the people who drove in didn't want to admit it? I tell you, man, fog of war. It's hard to know exactly what's true or not. What we know is an 8-year-old girl has lost her life and that lawlessness is contributing to this. Could it be that the person driving the vehicle claimed it was a different parking lot because they didn't want to implicate Black Lives Matter and these armed groups? It could be. Could be. They normally don't cooperate with police. That's one of the tenets of the far left we saw in Chaz. Do not cooperate with police. And it's a common, it is common, man. So maybe this is what really happened. There is a known armed group occupying this Wendy's where the protests have happened, where other people have been shot. They exited the interstate at University near the Wendy's. According to a city councilman, he says a witness claimed to see them try to enter the Wendy's. What do you think happened? I can't tell you, man. Right now, we can just sit back and wait for the evidence and for the investigation to come out to figure out what's going on. Maybe there's some footage because people tend to film things. But it's a horrifying story. And I want to make sure I stress this again before we move on to the next bit. This is legal. Standing around with their weapons, these people, look at this guy. You see that finger? That's trigger discipline. This guy knows what's up. And look, I'll tell you this. 100% respect to the people, to these individuals. Because I got to be fair. In my opinion, this is barely news. You know why? I do not believe that Americans just walking around doing nothing illegal is necessarily newsworthy for the most part. Now, again, to be fair, they're at the Wendy's where Rayshard Brooks was killed. There's a memorial. The building was burned down. So, yeah, it is newsworthy that an armed group of people came and are now occupying the lot, and this may contribute to a shooting. But on the surface, I was trying to make sure I make this clear, right? We had a 2A march in Richmond. Black Lives Matter and Boogaloo Boys teamed up, fists raised, chanting the same things. Yeah, the media won't tell you that. They won't. Now, the reason why I'm not leading with that story is that, in my opinion, it's not necessarily news that Americans just are walking around. It's not illegal to have guns, okay? In some places it is. New Jersey. It's ridiculous. The funny thing about New Jersey is you're not allowed to walk around with a weapon, but I'm pretty sure it says keep and bear arms. Yeah, well, I guess New Jersey doesn't care about the Constitution. But anyway, in these places, look, man, this guy, he's doing his thing. I got no issue with that. If somebody accidentally killed a little girl, the real issue is lawlessness. That's really what it's all about. Well, up in Georgia, it's not just about this little girl, man. I want to show you this story. Now, I'm not familiar with the Cauldron Pool. I don't know what this website is. It's a politically and theologically conservative website providing news and opinion on current events. I don't know what it's all about. What I do know is that these photos and videos are real. I have actually talked to some people about this, and there was a group, a black militia called the Not Effing Around Coalition. Yes, on video, seemed to be calling for a black ethno-state. You know what, man? As far as I can tell, actually, no, I gotta be clear on this one. Walking around wearing all black and having guns is legal, as far as I can tell, especially in Georgia. However, the leader actually may have made veiled threats when he said, he started insulting white militias and right-wing groups. And then he says something about, bring it, come on, let's go. And that may be a direct call to violence. So you're dancing on the razor's edge. I don't know for sure. Now, look, I don't know if this Cauldron Pool is, how credible they are or whatever, what their points are. But this article does aggregate many of these videos showing from the other day these militia members walking around. Now, check this out. In this tweet, NFAC's leader, Grandmaster Jay, describing how he will build a black ethno-state inside the U.S., boasting they are all ex-military, extremely disciplined, and expert shooters. Now, first and foremost, I'll give this guy some respect. To be fair, dude's tough as nails. And you know what? It's something we don't see a lot of. I think his ideas are nuts. I think he's incredibly dangerous. But this is a guy who's marching around with a militia, talking about what they want and how they're going to take it. And he says something like, we'll take Texas. He didn't say, okay, you see the headline. They say, heavily armed black militia calls for black ethno-state. We'll take Texas. He's not saying we'll take Texas. What he said was he wants the United States to give land to them so they can create a country just for black Americans. And he says, we'll take Texas. He's saying if they offered it, not that he would seize it by force. So, now these guys, they got crazy views, man. They believe crazy things. I don't even know if I can show you what he tweeted. But let me just tell you, this guy is, I don't like throwing around the word Nazi or anything like that, because especially, when they're black identity extremists. But you got to look at his Twitter feed, and people are sharing it around, and he makes references to World War II and certain views that seem strangely favorable to a specific ideology. I'll just put it that way. I don't know how else to frame it. I'm not saying he's necessarily pro-Nazi or anything like that, but he certainly is, relative to many of their views, seemingly in support of some weird... Let me just tell you this, man. They seem to be very much like the black Hebrew Israelites. They believe they are the true Jews. Weird stuff, man. But look, this is what I tell you. When I talk about lawlessness and chaos that's unfolding across this country, what people don't understand is that there's an ideological escalation. I remember I've mentioned this several times now, talking years ago about the potential for civil war. A lot of people don't want to hear it. Fine, whatever. And everyone told me because humans have a problem where they try and base their future predictions off of exactly how things are today. And that makes literally no sense. So let me give you an example. You ever see Back to the Future 2 when Marty McFly goes to the future? And what is it like? You've got gigantic holographic, shark or dinosaur. I can't remember. Everything was a futuristic version of the 80s. They couldn't actually tell what new technology would be developed and how things would actually be. Another example is Demolition Man. You ever see that movie? Great movie, by the way. They actually got a decent amount right in terms of culture. But in one scene, the bad guy goes up to a payphone, and the payphone has video calling on it. You see, back then they had payphones. So the assumption was, what would happen if you had a payphone, but it was just taken to the, to a crazier degree of technology? You put a camera in it, right? We don't use payphones. We got rid of them. Now we have weird Wi-Fi kiosks with computers in New York, but for the most part, we have cell phones. They couldn't predict what things would be like. This is what you need to understand when I talk about the prediction for the future. Stop imagining what it's like today. You have to imagine all of the possibilities, the evolution of methodology, technology, and what that will do to the human mind. So several years ago when I said, man, it looks like there's potential for civil war, the immediate reaction I got from so many people was, the Proud Boys and Antifa? We're not going to have, 10 million Proud Boys and 10 million Antifa, because the only thing they could see was fights between these two groups. So in their minds, they imagined that to a greater degree. A bunch of right-wing dudes marching, wearing, the polos, and a bunch of Antifa charging in full, to battle. Now, they don't realize what changes and how these lend themselves to these future developments. The technology, the methodology, the culture changes. But if you are building upon this, then there are certain predictions we can make in a general sense. So let me put it this way. When we see statues being torn down, the immediate assumption is that if this keeps happening, all of our statues will be torn down. No. What we are actually seeing is that lawlessness is ensuing across the country, and no one is standing up for property, public property in general. We're not just looking at, you got to do this, right? And I can't tell you how to predict the future because nobody knows. Here's how I try and make predictions, and I'm often wrong. But here's what I mean to say: they tear down a statue of Christopher Columbus. Trump says, what next? Jefferson, Washington? They did that too. But it's not about just statues. It's about no one defending the commons, the public property. No one standing up for themselves. What happens next? An 8-year-old girl gets shot. Things like that. We can also take statues to their logical conclusion. It's not even about history at this point. Now they're just destroying symbols of this country. Next, they'll target museums. They've already called for those being taken down. They'll target homes. They're already doing that. You give them the ability to destroy property. It has nothing to do with just them wiping out statues. In 2017, I believe it was, Donald Trump said, they want to tear down Stonewall Jackson. What's next? Jefferson? Where does it stop? And John Oliver, in his ever so short-sighted commentary, said, where does it stop? Somewhere, obviously, right, Trump? Somewhere it stops. Ha 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 ha. No, you moron. You don't understand how these things work. It stops when someone stops it. But if these are not being stopped, they keep happening. And lo and behold, John Oliver was wrong because he's an idiot. They eventually did tear down Jefferson, Washington, Ulysses S. Grant, and even some famous abolitionists and desecrated abolitionist statues, and it will keep happening until someone stops it. Now, based on that information, we can make some hard predictions, right? First of all, they're destroying property and no one is stopping them. They are killing people and no one is stopping them, and people are getting hit on highways and dying. What prediction can we make from this? Lawlessness, general lawlessness, meaning expect to see more general crime, which we're seeing. In New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, crime is skyrocketing. You can see more ideological expansion. Now we're seeing the black identity extremists go out and march in Georgia by the hundreds, directly challenging, dare I say threatening, right-wing militias, or white militias as they said. And we'll begin to see houses being targeted, like in St. Louis. Come on, man. Protesters returned to St. Louis area where a couple drew guns, and they started protesting that house. So without police, everything just starts falling apart, and you lose life. So a lot of people would say, well, based on everything we're seeing, they think statues will be torn down. No. Here's my prediction. At some point, someone moves to stop it. This is why I talk about the potential for civil war. People are destroying statues. They're taking over areas of cities with guns, like the Chaz, like Portland's been trying to do. They've been under siege. They've been, trying to burn down the courthouse for like a couple of weeks now, maybe a month, if you want to argue the whole protest was doing that. New York and DC have occupations. They tried storming the barricades at the White House. What do you think happens? Eventually, someone comes to stop it. Or maybe not. John Oliver said it stops somewhere. He doesn't get it. You tear down a statue today, tomorrow a bunch of people, like in Charlottesville, show up and they fight and people die. And you know what's funny to me? You know what's really, really funny? I think back to what Charlottesville was. What a moron John Oliver was. What a moron to say this. You had people trying to tear down statues and calling for their removal. Eventually you got literal like fringe groups showing up and fighting with each other, and someone died. And it was a shock to this nation. Shock that one person died. Where are we today? 17 people, I think, died in the unrest following the death of George Floyd. All of a sudden, it's just nothing. It's not a shock to this country anymore. People are just like, yeah, well, cop got shot in the head in Vegas. Woman just got killed on the highway. I mean, that was really dumb. A little girl just died. Is anyone going to come out and say how shocking it is that it seems these armed militias or whatever just killed a little girl? They're not. It's desensitizing, man. I remember when, it's really interesting. The LA riots was started because one guy got beaten up by the cops. Somebody filmed it. Today we have people being shot and killed and riots erupting across the country. And I always wondered how it is that you can actually have people like be shot and killed on camera and it doesn't always result in some kind of riot like it did. It's because we're being desensitized, which means escalation. Man, I'm sad for this little girl. I'm sad for the person on the highway. I mean, the person on the highway was really dumb. I can only be so sympathetic. If you walk onto a highway at night wearing all black around a curve, you're probably going to get hit. Perhaps we should do a better job of teaching our children that. But here's the point I want to leave you with. Extremist groups are on the rise. You have not yet seen what will come from these groups. This guy coming out saying he wants an ethno state. It won't end there. Were we hearing about people like him a while ago? I mean, only in the fringes, but they're all being drawn out and things are getting crazy. The left, these people are going on. Look at this. Look, I don't know if I have it pulled up actually, but over on MSNBC, they're saying Trump is holding an event at the most grandiose symbol of imperialism, Mount Rushmore. And it's like, what? Is that really how they view this country? And look, when you have mainstream cable networks and commentators that will tell you to be an extremist, when the people who get hit on the highway, I think there's a GoFundMe for her, it's like $45,000 raised. You know where this is going. The train tracks have diverged. To be fair, conservatives and moderates are mostly on the same train track. That we have not moved very far in either direction. In fact, moved slightly left. But the left, man, they've gone so far off the rails. That train is just long gone. I don't even know where it is anymore. So what do we get? Reckless violence, random killings, ethno-nationalists, black militias. And I can only see this continuing until someone tries to stop it. Now, here's the last point. If this gets too far and the left-wing faction grows too strong, and it takes a long time before someone tries to stop it. I'm talking about law enforcement, mind you, not individuals. They should not be engaging in this. Don't take the bait. When law enforcement tries to stop this, will it be too late? I don't know. The best thing I can say is everybody needs to calm down and de-escalate. People need to peacefully speak their minds and stand up for themselves. I read a story about a woman who went on Facebook, and she's not a high-profile figure. She recorded a video saying, here's how she feels. She got fired. I hate to hear it. You got fired, but good. Make videos. Here's what you can do. You want to know what you do? You make a video and just talk about how you feel. I don't know. I can't tell people what the right thing is, but I can tell you everything's seemingly falling apart. What we need is probably some law and order. Now, Trump can do that at the federal level, but if the states won't do it, then I don't know what to tell you, man. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at timcast.net at 4 p.m., and I will see you all then.